So I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker tonight, a native of Detroit, Michigan, Dr. The Detroit connection, boy, that Detroit connection. Dr. Robert Simmons is a director of the Center for Innovation in Urban Education at Loyola Marymount in Baltimore, as well as an associate professor of urban education and science education in the School of Education with a joint appointment in African American Studies program. Additionally, Robert is a member of the nationally recognized social justice collaborative, Ed Change, and a contributor to the Village Celebration. A former middle school science teacher in Detroit Public Schools, his teaching and administrative career in Detroit, Minnesota, and the Dominican Republic included being nominated twice as the Walt Disney World National Teacher of the Year and once for the Whitney and Elizabeth Macmillan Foundation Outstanding Educator Award. Additionally, Robert has been a part of a team of educators who started a STEM-focused middle school for boys, a board member at one of the few public Montessori schools in an urban community, and a founder of a mentoring program for African American boys in Minnesota. Robert has been a fellow with the Woodrow Wilson Fellowship Foundation, where he conducted environmental research in the rainforests of Costa Rica and participated in the Japan Fulbright Memorial Fund. As a contributing author to the highly acclaimed book, White Teachers, Diverse Classrooms, A Guide to Building Inclusive Schools, Promoting High Expectations and Eliminating Racism, and White Teachers, Diverse Classrooms, Creating Inclusive Schools, Building on Students' Diversity, and Providing True Educational Equity. His research focuses on the experiences of African American boys in public and Catholic schools, science education in urban schools, the usage of digital media in urban classrooms, African American male teachers, urban education, and the role of race in understanding the social context of schooling. Having been a nationally recognized for his research as an emerging scholar in the field of service learning in urban schools, Robert is the author of numerous publications in various outlets, including Educational Leadership, the Journal of African American Males in Education, and Urban Education. Additionally, Robert's first co-edited book, Learning to Talk About Race, Alleviating the Fear, was published by Stylist Publishing. He is currently working on 2 new books, Interrupting the School-to-Prison Pipeline in an Urban Jesuit High, and Supporting the Dreams of Urban Youth, Reflections of Educators During an Era of Urban School Reform. The author and evaluator of over $1.5 million in grants, Dr. Simmons' most recent grant, funded by NIH, focuses on the development of virtual science labs for K-12 students and teachers. As a consultant to well over 50 schools, having delivered numerous lectures throughout the United States and Europe on his research, Dr. Simmons is a highly sought-after speaker. Robert is also a renowned motivational speaker who openly shares his life experiences in Detroit during the height of the crack cocaine epidemic, the mental incarceration he experienced for much of his life due to the physical incarceration of his father, and the significant challenges he faced leaving his childhood home in a neighborhood where drugs and drug dealers were the norm, to being one of the few African-American students at an elite Jesuit high school. I had the privilege of meeting Dr. Simmons in 2007 when I was a graduate student at Eastern Michigan University. Go Eagles. You will always be an Eagle, brother. And so since that time, I had his classes for about 1 year, but I've been learning from him for about 6 years now. And so throughout this time, he's been a mentor, a role model, and a friend. And so I thank you for your passion, your dedication, your service in this work, and for your example that you set for me, Ale, all of the Eastern Connection, man. I thank you so much. And without further ado, I present to y'all Dr. Robert Simmons.
Andy turned his work in on time, so that makes it all good. So I want to thank Ahmed, Sam. Where's Sam at? He hide in the back, low key. And I want to thank Jennifer Oki. Is she here somewhere, Jennifer? And so I want to give a shout out to everybody from the 313 representing in the piece. So I always tell folks that I'm a hood rat by nature, but an intellectual because that's what I've had to do, right? And so this is going to be a conversation. So I'm going to let y'all know that them slides up there ain't got nothing to do with what we're going to talk about, right? So I got like 15, 20 minutes. So the sister Beard quoted Malcolm and Audre Lorde, so it let me know I was in good company. So we're talking about the legacy of black folks, right? So let's be clear. So in order to do that, I got to let it be known what we talking about, right? So I got to make sure I put on my gear, understand? And my gear starts with this here, all right? So this how we gonna get rolling, right? Thinking about our commitment as black folks, as all folks, to justice, our commitments to equity, right? It's not something that you talk about, it's something that you do. So as Sister Beard started with Malcolm and she got up here, it was like going to church. You know what I mean? So I appreciate you. Appreciate all the work you do. And so I want to talk a little bit about kind of this legacy that we have as Africans in America, right, who are doing this work that dates back to the motherland, to the continent, right? So we're not new to education. We educated the world, right? So if we understand our history, right, the Greeks and Romans didn't start philosophy. They raided the library and torched it in Alexandria in Egypt, right? So we come from this legacy of people who do this thing called education, right? So part of what I want to say is, as one of my folks from Detroit always says to me, is what up, doe, right? As a sign of greeting to let everybody know that we're in community here together. And that's the first lesson that we borrow from the legacy of African American teachers going back to slavery, right? Where this idea that literacy was linked to freedom. Education was linked to freedom, but also power, right? The power to control our own destiny, all right? So I want to start with this whole thing around Trayvon Martin and connect it to our work, because for a long time, I've always felt that too many African Americans get lost in the field of education without knowing their history. And this history of advocacy, and not advocacy where we write as intellectuals, but we're on the front line of the civil rights movement, right? Where we're on the front line in 54 talking about the whole Brown versus Board of Education, where people paid the ultimate price to educate our young folks back in the day so that our babies could read. So this isn't about rhetoric. This isn't an intellectual exercise. And being an academic, but also being someone who does community organizing, I always have this conversation with my academic colleagues, because they're always like, well, Robert, you spend a lot of time, more time in schools and on the block than you do on campus. And I always tell them, because that's what my ancestors demand of me. The academy does not own me. And I told them, and Ahmed has heard me say this before, I told them when they said, well, how you going to get tenure like that? I said, my mama raised me in Detroit. I saw my daddy hauled out in handcuffs and do hard time in Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. So I told him, because of that, I will not get tenure on my knees. But the point of this story is that we come from a legacy of freedom fighters, right? So if you're not in this as a freedom fighter, sister, I don't want you to lose any of your folks, but I'm going to ask you to leave. This is about freedom and justice. That's the legacy from which we come. So if you can't follow that, you're probably going to be offended with what I'm going to talk about. All right? Everybody still here. I don't want nobody to leave, no, nothing like that. What time they got to be where they got to be in the morning? Like 9 o'clock? All right, so I'm going to monitor folks, all right? So Bell Hooks said at one point that is really related to, and I feel that with Malcolm, Audre Lorde, we may as well just get into a little bit of Bell Hooks. Then we'll have a little bit of James Baldwin sprinkled through it, right? So this is where we going, right? So Bell Hooks said, the classroom remains the most radical space of possibility. I'm going to say that again. And I want everybody to say that with me, because this is important. Because the classroom is more than what happens in that physical space. The classroom for us is the community, right? The classroom, everybody there? The classroom, come on, raise your hand if you go to a black church. Raise your hand if you know about call and response. I'm calling and you responding. What's your name, bruh? Kyle Baker is telling us call and response. Kyle, tell him, call and response. There it is, all right? So, Sister Beard, you know call and response, right? You sure do, right? Brother Logan definitely knows that. He had better know that. All right, y'all ready? All right, cool. Bell Hooks says, the classroom, there we go, remains the most radical space of possibility. And the critical element to this goes back to Trayvon Martin. This idea of possibility, that you can't even possibly wear a hoodie, holla if you hear me, go get you a bag of Skittles and go back to your daddy house without being assumed that you're what? Criminal, a thug, whatever, right? This is all connected to our role in schools. And part of what I'm going to argue and have always argued is that our role as educators is more than what we see on test scores. But it's about how do we provide our young people with the disposition so that they can navigate a world that doesn't think a Dr. Robert Simmons is even supposed to exist. Where I'm supposed to be, as I was told, Robert, you ain't going to be nothing but just like your what? Your daddy, right? I was like, well, you know, he did make a lot of money laundering from them drug runners. I ain't trying to go to prison, though, right? They was like, what you mean? They ain't get it. It was a joke. You know what I mean? My mother was like, don't say that. She said, don't tell that joke tonight. So I hope she ain't watching. If she is, Mama, don't, you know, I ain't mean it. You know what I mean? But it's the truth, right? And so part of it is understanding our legacy as it relates to Trayvon Martin, where you found a lot of folks who would say, well, Simmons, you going up to the Million Hoodie March. And I said, guess what? I'm taking some of my students with me. Because they got to understand that this is real life, right? So they have the land of the free and the home of the what? Brave. Now, I don't know who's free when you, a brother, you walk down the street in wherever it was in Florida and you get shot. Like, that's a critical question. But the thing is, how do we challenge this particular idea in classrooms and still maintain a level of accountability? And I always tell folks, I am not suggesting that we don't need test scores to measure outcomes, because I think you do need some way to measure student success. But you also need to figure out, how do you teach young brothers in particular, and the group of bros that I've been working with for 5 years in Baltimore, our first lesson when we started 5 years ago was, how do you deal with the police in Baltimore City? It wasn't about, can you read? Because I always tell them, like, look, man, if you can't get to school alive, it don't matter whether you can read. Like, you need to understand how to respond to the police. So I was giving a talk in L.A. You know, L.A. got real, they got a real history of police brutality, if you know what I mean, right? And so part of it was talking to these folks saying, look, we can go into schools, and as particularly as African Americans, we have to understand our role as advocates for our students. We have this legacy. So often I've come across so many African American teachers, educators throughout the spectrum, whether you're in a classroom, preschool teacher, administrator, superintendent, whatever, where they're afraid. They're afraid to challenge this dominant narrative about black masculinity. They're afraid to challenge the misogyny in hip hop. They're afraid.
not understanding that wouldn't no black folks be able to work in integrated schools if it wasn't for black teachers marching and contributing to the leadership of the civil rights movement. So as African-American teachers, we come from a legacy. And I always tell folks, especially young teachers, right? They're like, well, Dr. Simmons, we're going to go out and protest tomorrow. I'm like, no, I ain't say that. You need to be organized. And you can't stand up in your faculty meeting as a lone voice because you're going to take one to the head. Boom, they drop you. Right? But so part of it is understanding, and this is my challenge to you, is how do you do this as a collective? Right? Because we have this legacy of doing this as a collective. But yet, you find so many folks running through schools by themselves, and then they'll call me like, I just lost my job today. I'm like, sister, you told the principal F you. I mean, like, I get it, but like, you can't do that. Right? That's the reality of it. Nowhere can you do that, right? Well, now I will say that one of the things is people always laugh at. Now at the university, once you get tenure, you might be able to do that. You know what I mean? Unless you look like me, right? Then it's a problem. And I was telling our man, I said, so I got tenure this year, right? And so, thank you. But check this out though. And this is the funny part of it is that Loyola University, Maryland has been around since 18 some odd another, right? And so Jesuits own slaves. So that's kind of news to some people. They're like, what? I thought they was about social justice. Nah, bro, they own slaves, right? They're like, huh. But since 1850, whatever it is, somebody can look it up and even tell me. Not that I care, because it don't matter. But since then, I'm only the second African-American male to ever get tenure and promotion. But understand this, and this goes back to what I'm talking about with this legacy. I did it remembering that I had to do it in the spirit of our ancestors, and I did not do it alone, right? And so I had my ancestors kind of riding along with me to remind me that you ain't crazy. Raise your hand if your parents ever had to pull you to the side and say, son, daughter, you ain't crazy. The world is a little bit off, right? And when it's wrought with issues, and we take this from a critical race theory perspective, where we understand that the world, and particularly the United States of America, is built on a foundation of racism, sexism, capitalism, and militarism, we understand that we are in a fight, a real fight for the lives of our kids. But I want to go back to my original point with this, is that it's about doing this as a collective. Raise your hand if you hear me. You got to do it as a collective. This means when y'all leave this room and you go back to the bar, after the bar, right? Sister Beard, you hear this, right? I'm giving them directions, what to do after the bar, all right? You have to think about what is your plan as a collective. So if you're in Jacksonville and then you're working in Miami, I ain't say for the Jacksonville folks to act crazy, Mr. Logan. All I'm saying is that you have no reason to not say to yourselves, what is our plan? Like, there needs to be communication. If we're in Detroit, where's my, now Detroit folks, y'all can act the fool. There it is. Yeah, there it is. All right, so, but you can't tell me that y'all are about the collective when I have met TFA folks in Detroit that some of y'all don't know. Hello? Come on now, own that. Raise your hand if it's people that you've never met that are TFA alumni, black folks in your city, and you've run into them. But the point is that you have to do this as the collective. And one of the things that I appreciate about TFA is that it's not just about what happens in the classroom, but it's about nurturing future leaders in our system, right? And so part of it is, where are those leaders and are you connected to them? Because you cannot do it by yourself, right? You can't do it with just TFA folks. You have to do it with the community that you teach in. And that's the next thing that I want to talk about. And so I want to give us a little James Baldwin. And so Baldwin said that when we're in a space and we're teaching African-American children, it's a revolutionary act, right? How many people saw The Butler, right? And so the brother went out to Oakland. And so my mother calls me and she said, look here, you can't watch that movie and then go back to Loyola. You got to watch it on like a Friday, so you have a couple days before you got to go back to the university. I said, what you talking about? She said, look, I was around at that time. And she said, we tore stuff up, right? So I come from this long legacy of folks that really are into this whole social justice thing, but not as something to do, but as a lifestyle, right? As a commitment, right? And so I always challenge folks who tell me they believe in social justice, and I'm like, but are you telling Whole Foods in Detroit, like, who is that serving? And I'm not suggesting you don't go to Whole Foods, because I go to Whole Foods, right? All I'm suggesting is that Whole Foods in Midtown of Detroit don't serve the people that I grew up with in the city. And I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't be there. All I'm saying is, if we believe in social justice, how do we problematize these things, right? How do we challenge this system that in many ways is linked to oppression, right? It's antithetical to the revolution, okay? So the other thing I want to talk about is this issue of literacy. Where's the literacy crowd? They usually got real crazy, too. Yeah, where's the literacy crowd? That's all y'all gonna do? Man, where the science and math folks at? Holla, right? Social studies people. Dang, administrative folks. Sister Beard, you still here? All right. Sister Beard ain't saying nothing about the administrative people, but I got love for her, all right? Oh, I was supposed to say next slide. Let me see. All right, next slide. So I want to tell this story, and Ahmed, you let me know how much time I have, because you know I talk for an hour. So I got like 20 minutes, so y'all let me know. So the slide up here talks about where the Spelman folks at. So I'm a Spelman Morehouse kid. So aside from, now the Morehouse people don't get too happy because my daddy went to Morehouse. He had a few, he was an inmate. So I'm just saying, you know what I mean? But there's a reason. And I affectionately say that to Morehouse brothers all the time. Know what I mean? Because my mother went to her 40th, what do they call that thing? A reunion. She'll be a golden girl next time, so she's all excited. I don't know what that means, but she told me I had to go and get some money. So I said, I'm going to be absent. You know what I mean? So, but the point is that I grew up in this culture, regardless of my father's missteps, where I knew what my responsibility was, right? Like, I grew up reading Diop. I could spout out Lerone Bennett before the Mayflower by the time I was in 10th grade. I hated history in my high school because it was all Eurocentric, but that's another conversation, right? Like, what the Nina, the Pinta, and as Malcolm said, the whatchamacallit, I mean, like, that's all to the story, right? And so part of what I'm suggesting, and we read Naeem Akbar in high school, right? Visions for Black Men. And my mother and father had him when he was at Morehouse, back when he was Luther Weems, kind of like Muhammad Ali when he was Cassius Clay, right? And his book, Visions for Black Men, is something that I've suggested should be required reading for all brothers, right? Visions for Black Men. And so Brother Akbar wrote this book. And when I think about being from the D, right, and if you ain't from the D, you can't talk about our mayor who's about to get convicted and do 20 to 30. You can't talk about us filing for bankruptcy and 40% of the lights ain't on. Where's the Detroit folks? Yeah, we'll have to talk after. But the point of the matter is that the education that my father received did not save him, right? It didn't save him. And so I always tell folks is that even if we're in the trenches with our students in some capacity, we also have to think about what are the other skills that they need. And we come from this legacy of that. So going back to slavery, it wasn't just teaching them how to read. It was teaching them how to understand the rules of the field and the house. Because when you get in the house, you can't act a fool. And you can't act a fool in the field because you're going to get shot. That's the reality of it. And one of the things that we recognize that a lot of these rules are linked to issues of cultural flexibility, right? And so anyone who understands ed research, cultural flexibility comes out of the work of Prudence Carter, right? And you situate that alongside Du Bois' work, which was double. Hold on. Oh, Sister Beard. Y'all. Double. All right, Sister Beard. We're going to have to get some folks, W.E.B. Du Bois, get them some stuff going on. All right, then. Put that on the list. Most folks was with it, but it's a few folks that was stragglers. I ain't going to call nobody out, but Brother Logan better not have been one of them. It'll be a problem. Won't return no more phone calls. So, but the point of this is that as you think about your work as administrators, leaders, recruiters, how do you determine whether a core member has the ability to enact cultural flexibility and double consciousness in our young folks? Is that built into the rubric? So it's not, and I'm not challenging the rubric. All I'm suggesting is if we understand our history as African Americans in education, it was stuff that wasn't found on a damn rubric. I think rubrics are nice, but rubrics have to deal with the complexity and the intersections of what it requires to educate our young folks. So, next slide. I think it's next slide. So, I want to talk a little bit about and challenge you on a couple of things. And so, the first book chapter that I ever wrote was in White Teachers, Diverse Classrooms. And so, for those that know the work of Gloria Ladson Billings, that was when she called me one time, and I didn't even know it was her. Right? I'm picking up the phone like, hello? And, normally if I'm in my Dr. Simmons voice, I'm like, hello? Right? Now, when I'm mad, calls are like, what up, man? You good? Right? So it's that whole idea of cultural flexibility, right? Dr. Ladson Billings calls, and she knew my dissertation chairs. Long story short, she had read my chapter. And, raise your hand if you've read Dream Keepers. Now, look, raise your hand if you teach black kids. Sister Beard, take note. I want you to write this down, all right? Raise your hand if you teach black kids. African-American kids in some capacity. They're involved with black kids in the black community. Raise your hand if you've never read Dream Keepers. Be honest. If you've never read Dream Keepers, Sister Beard, you got to get it. It's a classic text. It's like reading Native Son, Invisible Man, right? So if you don't know anything about educating black kids, you can't even start unless you've read Dream Keepers, right? So Sister Ladson Billings calls me and says, this empty desk book chapter that you wrote was deep. I was like, whoa, this is Gloria Ladson Billings calling me. It's like, whoa, what? You got the wrong number, right? In this particular text, and you can find it, I think it's like the third, fourth chapter in White Teachers, Diverse Classrooms, all right? Is that it talks about all of the things that I learned from a student that I had to bury, right? So for all those from Detroit, I'm telling the story from teaching at Drew Middle School. Raise your hand if you know Drew Middle School, you're from the D. Right? It's hood. You know what I mean? Like metal detector to get in. You walking through like, oh, what's up? Right? But the point is that from this experience, my challenge to you is this. How do you connect with the lives of the young folks that you teach? It's not about whether you are from there, because guess what? It's about where you at. So if you're in Baltimore, you better learn about Baltimore. If you're in Jacksonville, you better learn about Jacksonville. If you're in New York City, it ain't about learning about New York City. You better learn about Brooklyn. Wherever you at, we're the Brooklyn folks in here, right? So the BK in the house, right? So whatever it is, you have to understand the context of which you do your work. It's not about showing up saying, oh, I'm black and I identify with them. Right? It's not about that. It's about understanding the context in which you exist. It's about understanding the context where you work. If Sister Beard took me to Rio Grande, I'd be lost. I'd have to understand my Latino brothers and sisters and their struggle, but I would also challenge us to understand the connection between the struggle of everyone in communities of color throughout the world. Cesar Chavez, Dr. King, Brother X, like all of these people. Understand the challenges, understand the narrative of our brothers and sisters that have been forced to stay on reservations, and this is their land. Let's have that conversation, right? They bought Manhattan for $1. Holla at me. It's worth more than $1, and they knew that then, right? So again, I challenge you to think about how do you get to know the context in which you work? How do you understand the role of the Boys and Girls Club? Right? So I've been working with the Boys and Girls Club in Baltimore. 2 minutes? Dang. I'm going to finish this story. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. I'm going to ask Sister, can I get 3 minutes? All right, 3 minutes. Sorry, bro. So we've been working on this project, and you talk about understanding education, and part of my challenge to you is this. We worked with the Boys and Girls Club, right? And we meaning me and a couple of other bros from Morgan State. Any Morgan State folks here? None? Sister Beer, you got to get on that. Got to get on that. Morgan State, good spot. Any Loyola people here? Really? Oh, you get love too, no doubt. Loyola crew in the house. All right, so where are the Detroit people? Just one more time for my own edification. God, I love it. But the point is that as you think about this, we built this program in the juvenile detention facility. How many people watch The Wire? Right? So there are half-truths in The Wire about Baltimore. If you've never been to Baltimore, come on up. I know y'all here for a week. Sister Beard, close your ears. You can skip some of this event. I'll come get y'all, take y'all up to Baltimore. Y'all can see some stuff going on in Baltimore. Like, I'm serious. Sister Beard, I'm sorry. I had to put that plug in there for Baltimore. I know you probably like, don't invite this dude back. All right. So no, I am serious. But anyway, but the point is that we started a Boys and Girls Club in the juvenile detention facility for these young folks. Because I always say, young folks, incarcerated or not, we can't throw them away. Like, they're all worth saving. And we will learn from them. So some of the young bros that have gone through this program, we had a couple sisters go to the program, haven't been back since we implemented this program. So my challenge to you is not only understanding the context, but how do you transition your leadership and what you've learned in Teach for America into other educational enterprises? Like, how do you take a Teach for America brand and say, let's go talk to the Boys and Girls Club and let's build a Boys and Girls Club program, Teach for America, and house it somewhere, like wherever you want to house it at. Like, how do you build additional educational opportunities and experiences for core members who don't know Baltimore? Right? So if we're talking about how do we get young people, and again, don't put them on the bus and drive them through the west side of Detroit. One of my homeboys at the University of Illinois, Chicago, said one time, Dave said, man, look, I'm from the south side of Chicago. Where's Chicago folks at? Right? Woo, y'all deep. Don't say nothing bad about the Detroit Tigers beating the White Sox. They might run you up out of here. Where'd our man go? He left? Oh, I thought you left. It was about to be a riot up in here. But they rolled through it. So my homeboy said, man, look, dude. And he was serious. He from the south side. Got PhD, urban ed, just real off-the-chain brother. He said, man, we shoot missionaries on the south side of Chicago. I was like, what? He's like, man, we don't need nobody coming to the south side of Chicago to fix our kids. Our kids don't need to be fixed. The system needs to be fixed. Now, if you are here, right, and your understanding of the world is bound up with ours, right, kind of built on this Maori quote, right, don't come here to help us, but if your understanding of humanity and dignity is bound up with mine, then let us work together. Don't come here as a missionary, because we don't need you to fix our kids. We need you to help us fix the system, right? So the last thing I want to say, I guess is next slide maybe. I don't even know. We talked about that. Next slide. Go to the next slide. What's that say? All right, go back to the last one. Then we'll get to that one. All right, cool. All right, so I want to talk about learning from my elders and Sister Beard. Then you can run me off, get the hook like we at the Apollo. All right? So I think that Sister Hooks makes a great point in that quote, right? Thinking about the intellectual destiny, but also the uplift of the race, and kind of building on Garvey, where he said, up, you mighty race, right? And understanding that the current positionality of so many of our people doesn't have to be in cement. But the role of teachers and folks in education is it has to be about a mission. So if you're in this work and it's not part of your life's mission, then you need to get out. This is a life's mission, because it's a journey. It took however many years for us to get in this predicament, and it's a challenge to get out of. And so that's my challenge to you. How do you contribute to the justice conditions of our people? How do you contribute to the justice conditions of Latino people? How do you contribute to the justice conditions of this country? Next slide. Last slide. So I go back to the empty desk, because the empty desk taught me a lot, all right? And as I think about this idea of the empty desk, I lay out a challenge to you, right? And I lay out this challenge to myself all the time, right? So the first one is, I don't even know what that says. Oh, what are you on a mission to do? Because if you don't know, then Sister Beard, we need to provide some professional development. Like, it's true. Like, what are you on a mission to do? Why are you here? Because if you're here to kick it in D.C., you need to go back where you came from. But how are we here right now? And you can't kick it in D.C., right? But if you're here in this space, in this moment, how are you building? How are you building towards a much more equitable society for our kids in schools? Second question, what do you owe? Because ain't none of y'all here by yourself. Somebody helped you get here. And 9 times out of 10, 9.5 times out of 10, it was a teacher. A teacher who told you to stand up, Ahmed Logan, and be accountable. Stand up, Sister Beard, and let your voice go forward. Stand up, Sister Beard, and let your light shine. So the question becomes, what do we owe? What do you owe yourself? What do you owe your community? What do you owe our ancestors who paid the ultimate price? They died for us to be here. They died for us to live in this society with challenges, but also to enjoy a particular level of freedom that's not enjoyed everywhere. So the third piece is, what is your contribution to the legacy that you have inherited? Because you've inherited a legacy. You have inherited a legacy that dates back to the continent, to the motherland. We've been educators forever. We've been activists forever. We have been educators our whole lives. So my challenge to you is this. How will you uphold that legacy of being an educator as an African American? Thank you, and God bless everybody.